I would now request Mr. Srinivas Dempu, Vice President AIMA and Chairman Dempu Group of Companies, to open the session with his introductory remarks.
Thank you, and a very warm welcome to our esteemed guest and keynote speaker for today's event, Mr. Kabir Bedi, who's an international actor, Bollywood icon, and now also an author. His book has become very famous, The Stories I Must Tell. And I think we will get a lot of insights as Vikram speaks to him later on. My friend Vikram Chandra, ladies and gentlemen, it is a real pleasure to have all of you with us, and a very warm welcome in a special session with one of the global icons of cinema and an actor who I admire deeply, Mr. Kabir Bedi. I have been given the pleasant task of introducing him, though I don't think he needs any introduction, not only amongst the viewers here, but all across the country. He was one of the pioneering Indian actors who ventured into American and European films and theatre. Also, he was not confined to playing Indian characters in Western productions, and he did starring roles in both film and theatre. Before Om Puri and Irfan Khan came on the scene, he was one Indian star who straddled Hollywood and Bollywood with equal ease. Those amongst us of certain vintage would remember him as one of the 90s stud brigade of Hindi cinema, who ventured into mold-breaking films and set a new trend in portrayal of machismo on Indian screen. He made his debut in the same film as Zeenat Aman, the quirky O.P. Ralan thriller Halchal. He went on to make a big impact in Raj Khosla's Kacche Dhage and Mahesh Bhatt's debut film Manzile Aur Bhi Hai. He looked beyond Bombay for glory and found fame in countries like Italy, where his TV series Sandokan became a rage. Hollywood followed, and he performed alongside Michael Caine, Omar Sharif, and Rex Harrison in Ashanti. He made a global splash playing the chief henchman of the villain in the 83 Bond movie, Octopussy. He returned to Hindi films with a bang in the year of 1988 with a blockbuster Khoon Bari Maang, and recently was seen in Timanshu Dhulia's film Sahed Biwi or Gangster. A consummate actor, he has proved his histrionics beyond the camera. He has portrayed some of the most iconic characters on stage, including the likes of Tughlaq, Othello, and Shah Jahan. He has been a successful actor on the global theatre circuit. He's an actor with social and political intelligence, and he regularly writes for the print and digital media. He's also known for his spectacular life and lifestyle, which have brightened the humdrum lives of the masses for decades. And now he has chosen to set the record straight through his book, The Stories I Must Tell, and he told his story himself. We are delighted to have you, Mr. Kabir Bedi, with us today for a candid conversation on your life, beliefs, and opinions, and beyond the films. We are pleased to have my friend, renowned journalist and founder of Editorji, Mr. Vikram Chandra, who I have been convincing him for a long time to come and settle in my state in Goa, to moderate the interaction with Mr. Bedi. He's a former CEO of NDTV, where he became known for reporting on the Kashmir conflict and anchoring popular news and debate shows, including the very popular Big Fight. He has also written a best-selling novel based in Kashmir. He later on went to form Editorji, a video-based news app. It is now my pleasure to invite Vikram to take over and conduct the session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Dempo, and I can tell you nobody needs a second invitation to move to Goa. So now that you've said that, I'm coming, so we should be all prepared for that. Kabir Bedi, it's an absolute pleasure and privilege to have you, and to get the chance to talk to you. And let me just start off by saying that we've all seen you on screen, for a long, long time. But your skills as an author, I've read many autobiographies, but I think the candidness, the emotion, the ability to just put your stories, and there are so many interesting stories in a very simple manner, as you've done in this book. It is one of the most engaging books I've read in a very long time. And I'm going to start off by recommending strongly to everyone who hasn't yet read it that they should do so. So it's great to get a chance to talk to you. And I can tell you, you have so many stories that you must tell that if you go through even 10% of them, this 45 minutes is going to fly.
Vikram, that's fantastic that you say that. It's the one of the best endorsements I could hope to get for my book, coming from somebody like you. I know you're not doing me any favors as a fellow Stephanian, but I know your journalist integrity is such that you will give your honest opinion. I'm most grateful for that. I also want to thank Srinivas Dempo for that wonderful introduction, and Rekha Sethi, who invited me on behalf of the All India Management Association. So I'm delighted to be here, delighted to be chatting to you, and I look forward to a great session in the questions and answers ahead.
Yeah, and there's one story which is not in your book, which I'm going to get you to recount, which ties up with that Stephens connection, how both of us were on the same team in the ultimate debate, the debate to settle whether St. Stephen's is the better debating college or Hindu college. That final question was settled at the Titans Cup, which we both got a chance to speak to. So maybe I'm going to come back to that towards the end of this.
Right. Quickly to add that we won the session, less people...
Obviously, St. Stephen's won that session, or I wouldn't be referring to it out here.
We would
hiding
say so,
my table and pretending that it never took place. So yes,
right.
We will come back and we will talk about it, obviously, because yes, we won that debate. All right, but let me start off first by asking you, Mr. Dempo was talking about how you're so well known and you're so famous in India. Just out of curiosity, are you more famous in India or more famous in Italy?
I'd probably say Italy. I'm probably more famous in Italy because everybody in Italy knows me, from grandmothers to grandchildren. My series is played, replayed, and I've done such a body of work that in the end, the Italian government actually knighted me. I'm Cavaliere. So there is a whole generations that know me. So I can't say more famous in India because I'm sure there are many parts of India where they speak different languages, don't speak Hindi, don't see English films, that may not have seen me. So I can't say I'm more famous here. I can certainly say I'm very famous in Italy.
Right.
And I've been for a long time.
That's something we should try and organize. I'm going to get Rekha to try. We should have an AIMA session in Italy at some point, which we will all come to, and you will be there as a speaker, and you will take us through the streets, and we'll be
absolutely. It'd be fantastic.
But before I get to Italy and I get to Sandokan and I get that, let's start at the very beginning of your book, because I thought that was one of the most interesting stories, and a story very few of us knew. Is that story about your going in to interview the Beatles really correct? And you were ushered in there because Brian Epstein couldn't talk to you because he had a towel around him, so you were ushered in to interview the Beatles. Tell us about that story to start off with.
I used to freelance with All India Radio because even though I got into St. Stephen's because of my marks and merit, but my parents were very idealistic people. I hope we get a chance to speak about them, who transitioned from being freedom fighters to being major religious figures, my mother becoming a Buddhist nun, but there wasn't much money in the till. And so that's how I paid for my college, freelancing and doing things like All India Radio. And when the Beatles came into town, I was absolutely determined to get them because I was the biggest Beatles fan in the world. And I knew that they'd been in trouble in Manila, that had some problems with the government. So I went to the hotel where the whole Delhi press corps was milling around looking for the Beatles. I knew I had to find Brian Epstein because he was the key. And he came down and I confronted him as he was about to get into a car. And I said, "Sir, the government have scheduled an interview with the Beatles tonight at 10 o'clock. And he exploded. He said, "I will not allow the boys to do any interview. The boys will not give an interview." I said, "Sir, it's a government matter. They'll get into trouble with the government. I'm a big fan of the Beatles. I don't want them to get in trouble." "Nonsense. I will give the bloody interview." Good enough for me. Brian Epstein gave me an interview, no less. So when I actually went up to his room, he seemed to be unwell, sweating in a dressing gown, etc. I said, "Kabir Bedi here, sir, from All India Radio, interview tonight scheduled." And he said, "Oh God, I can't do this." And he took me across the entire length of the floor of the Oberoi Hotel to the other end where the suite was, where the Beatles were, knocked on the door and said, "Boys, do me a favor, give this chap an interview." And Paul McCartney led me in, and I was in that room with the Beatles. Now, the Beatles weren't just the greatest musicians in the world for me. They represented the whole age, the 60s in which we came of age, the time of social change, the time of sexual, cultural, even political revolution, people demonstrating for peace for the first time in history. And the Beatles represented all that cultural change that was happening, all the hippie culture, the psychedelic shirts, the mood of the age. And what happened in that interview, I'm not going to get into because A, it's long, and B, I wouldn't be able to do it justice in a few minutes. But the important thing there was that the aftermath of the interview caused a massive crisis in my life.
Before I come to the crisis, because it's an interesting crisis and that led to you moving on. So one of the aspects of that interview, which I think everyone would be really fascinated to know, is how you tried very hard to get John Lennon to admit that he had drugs.
Right, I did. I was very cheeky.
In a country where drugs were actually illegal. So I admire your courage. And how did that go?
Well, you know, when I sort of talked about hash and things like that, there was a kind of underlying nudge and a wink. But when I started talking about LSD, he got really cagey because he said, that's dangerous. And I said, yes, it is dangerous. You know, but, and he didn't want to get into that. He says, you know, that kind of talk can be very dangerous. And he was right, because it's not a drug that you fool around with. It's a serious drug for those that take it. Those that fool around with it often suffer greatly. So he didn't give me any. He said, I know you want a scoop, lad, but I can't help you here. And that was the end of that talk. But we talked of many other things.
And the crisis you refer to is, of course, the nightmare of anybody who's ever been a journalist or any creative field. All India Radio erased the tape of that interview.
Yes.
And they've never found it after that?
No, they erased it because I don't blame the backroom boys.
Sometimes they say we erased it, but actually they mean we lost it, and they tell you that we erased it. So it was actually recorded over to save tape.
Well, those days they didn't have much money, and they used to tape over everything for the new programs. So, but you know, the very fact that it wasn't flagged as a major interview, it wasn't given a huge build-up, and it just broadcast, and now an interview with the Beatles, and then when I go to get it, they say it's gone. It made me think, do I really want to work with these people? Is this where I want the rest of my life to be? I mean, I always loved doing creative things, and I thought this was a great way to express my creativity in radio and burgeoning field of television. And they let me down on both scores. What happened in television is another chapter in my book, and where they let me down there. But it made me think of all the options I had. I wrote down all the possibilities. I wrote down all my aptitudes and figured out what fit, which of my possibilities absorbed most of my abilities. And I sort of came to the conclusion I wanted to be a filmmaker. So I was not one of those guys that fancied himself as an actor, that came to Bombay to be an actor. I actually came to Bombay to be a filmmaker. And a lot of people don't know this, but I spent 5 years of my life in the corporate world. I was the film chief of Lintas with Alec Padamsi and Jason DeCuna and other greats in the agency. I was with O&M, at that time headed by Frank Simoes before he founded his own agency. Ranjan Kapoor used to be sharing a cabin next to mine, and Suresh Malik and all these advertising legends were people that were my colleagues. And it was a huge decision for me to leave the security of advertising, where I was doing extremely well and my work was extremely appreciated, and leave that security for the unknown wilds of Bollywood. But something in me pushed me to make that move, because I just want to explore that side of myself. And it led to all the things that it led to. So it was one of those gambles that did pay off. My life actually has been full of transitions where I had to make major decisions on whether I should take that next step or not. And some decisions that were actually taken for you, especially with the relationships, which I think is one of the parts of your book which are really candid. I mean, you've spoken out, and that's why they've got a lot of attention. But before I come to some of those relationships with, the various women in your life, with your parents, with your children, before I come to that, just on the career part of it, the transition from corporate culture and making ads and being in the advertising business, moving from there to theatre and Bollywood, how did that journey happen? And what point did you really feel that I have to go international to really get a claim? acting used to be a hobby of mine. I did it in Sherwood, my school. I did it at St. Stephen's. I did colleges around there with Yatrik in Delhi, etc. And my great fortune was that when I joined Lintas, my boss happened to be Alec Padamsee. So Alec Padamsee was the guru and the god of theatre in Bombay. And he put me in a play called Maratsad, where he put me in a small role, but he saw what I could do. And the next thing I know, he cast me as Tughlaq, which is Girish Karnad's first play in English. And the way he staged it,
well, it became famous also, let's be honest, partly because of an opening scene which had you more or less in the nude, right? From the behind.
Well, that was the opening image. It was an image that absolutely staggered the whole of Bombay, because this play opened with me standing with my back to the audience, arms out, and looking stoplight, looking stark naked. And they gasped, and everyone remembered that image, and it became the talk of the town, made me known immediately. And
if you're lucky it didn't burn down the theatre, it might have happened now, right? Burning down theatres or something.
But it was a spectacular image. It was a great play and brilliantly directed by Alec. Cynics said that my butt made the film, the play a success, but the truth is, it was the play. But it certainly got me known, and it certainly got me the attention of Bollywood. And so Bollywood offers started coming in. And I thought, okay, I want to be a filmmaker. Let's join Bollywood as an actor and see where it goes. When I joined Bollywood as an actor, one of the things I realized is I didn't like singing and dancing. And that was a huge problem, because to be a successful leading man, you had to do singing and dancing. And I fancied myself thinking, I'm a serious actor, I don't want to do this. I love watching it. It's great. Nobody does it better in the world. I love watching it. I just can't do it. So I knew I had to, if I wanted acting to be a career, then I had to look further afield. So I was still sort of divided between acting and filmmaking, because I'd had a few hits right up front. But when the Italians came into town and they offered me the chance to audition for the role of Sandokan, which was a legendary character, almost like the Robin Hood of Italy, who was an Asian pirate. And they asked me to come at my own expense to Rome. I didn't hesitate. I didn't stand on ceremony and say, no, I'm a big actor, how dare you ask me to pay my own way? I said, no, it's an opportunity, go there. And this recognizing opportunity has been also one of the hallmarks of my life. So that led to extraordinary success in Italy. And that's how that journey really happened, because it wasn't an easy audition. I mean, they checked me out on every front: horse riding, acting, drama, love scenes, swimming, fencing, whatever. And they saw that I had the aptitude. They saw that they liked what they saw, and I got the role. And it went on to break every television record in Europe. And that record lasted for decades. So it was a great opportunity for me to launch a whole different career outside India. And I was glad I aced the audition, because that gave me all the benefits of that success.
But you're right. It's a bit of a gamble, right? To say that I'm going to pay my own audition. Did they give you any indication? Because in your book, you hint that they more or less said, we like this person and he is going to be Sandokan. And
the art director said that. The art director said that. He was an Oscar-winning art director, Nino Navarrese, a great man. The director said, no, we have to test him. They had actually come to Bombay in those days, as the first city of a 6-nation tour they were doing across Asia to find the best actor in Asia for the role of Sandokan, because it's such an iconic role. And the art director said, we've got our man, but he wasn't so sure, and the producer had to go along with the director. So I was on tenterhooks when I went to Rome to do the thing. In fact, even after doing all my auditions very well, they didn't tell me I'd got the role till an hour before I caught the plane back to Bombay. They called me to this dinner, and we had this lovely dinner, and nobody's telling me, did I get the role or not? Is this just a golden handshake, or what is it? In the end, they said, and you will be Sandokan. And that was it. My life took a totally different turn and different course.
So Sandokan made you a superstar in Italy, the likes of which I think Italy has very rarely seen. You were probably one of the most famous people in Italy at the peak of Sandokan, probably still are. certainly the best known Indian, I think that we've probably ever had in Italy.
Yes.
Probably ahead of Mahatma Gandhi. I don't know. Maybe he's known more than you are, but I'm not sure everyone knows.
I'm sure he's known better than me.
But still, you know what I mean. That it's that level of knowledge of a person that you had a superstar status completely in Italy. When you came back to start doing roles here in India, when you came back to Bollywood, were you almost surprised that there were other bigger stars in Bollywood than you were at that time? So did that take you a certain amount of adjustment?
No, not really, because at the time of the success of Sandokan, I'd gone there with Parveen because Parveen and I were in a major relationship at the time, Parveen Babi. And so I had to come back to India to finish my film, because in those days we shot films on the installment plan, and they took a long time to shoot. So I had to come back to India in between my other Italian ventures to finish the films. So, and Bollywood certainly knew about my success in a big way, although it didn't sort of become an all-Indian kind of news that it should have. But I wasn't particularly bothered because I was planning to go abroad and live there and work there. And Parveen also decided she wanted to come with me because I'd got her the lead role in my next series with the Italians. So I wasn't worried about any Bollywood actors, being bigger than me in India, etc. They had their place, they had their skills, they had their fan followings, and I had mine. And I wasn't in any competition, and I don't think they saw me as competition either in that sense.
You've written very candidly about some of your relations. You were mentioning Parveen Babi. So you've written very candidly about the fact that you were deeply in love. You had but still a stormy relationship. There were insecurities when she came with you to Italy and saw just how big you are. There were times when she felt slighted when you're at an airport and she's being pushed aside. Do you feel that put a slight cloud over that entire period for you having to deal with that? Or at the end of the day, was what the happy moments of the relationship, were they still exceptionally important for you at that point?
I think that's a question with two dimensions. One was the fact that Parveen was a bigger star than me in India when she came with me to Italy. And of course, being slighted on occasions hurt her deeply because she had her own ego. She was a star. She was somebody who made her way from Junagadh to becoming a major star in Bombay. A girl with enormous intelligence, grit, talent. And there was a time, I won't get into the whole story, but how I chose to walk out of a dinner with Gina Lollobrigida because she insulted Parveen. Because she said to Parveen, "And you, my dear, what are you doing here? Following the star?" And Parveen was very quick. She was very sharp. She looked at Gina and said, "No, my dear, I'm with my man because I have a man." And she said, "Oh, she's very clever. She's very smart." And the next thing Parveen said to me, she said, "I've had enough, I'm leaving." And I had faced this dilemma of and this was a small private dinner with Gina, do I walk out of one of Italy's biggest international stars' dinner, or do I side with my woman? And I realized that Gina had overstepped her mark and she had insulted Parveen, and I walked out with Parveen. But the other dimension that I want to mention is that the clouds that came over Parveen's life later in terms of the mental stresses and the mental problems she faced were there at that time. So there was this extraordinary success happening and this extraordinary emotional drama happening, both based on her bruised ego as well as her oversensitive sensibility because of the conditions she had. And this caused a strange interaction of intense joy on one level and intense stress on the other level. So that's one of the chapters of my book. And I had to share that as honestly as possible because that's what happened and I needed people to know what exactly happened.
So I'm seeing one of the questions already coming in from the audience. What is the hardest thing to write about in your biography? Was it some of these relations? Was it the relationship with Parveen, or perhaps another episode with mental illness that you did have to deal with, and which I personally found a very moving story was your son and what he went through also with mental illness. Was that the toughest thing to write about?
That probably was the toughest because, to have a son with dealing with schizophrenia at a time when he's in the prime of his life, when he's a graduate of Carnegie Mellon University, could get any job in the infotech world, and at the dawn of the information age, and then be struck down by schizophrenia. And then the story that I write really is of a father trying to prevent a son committing suicide. Yeah. Because he'd come to the point where he said, I just want to carry on like this. And so going back into that whole emotion of that time and that experience of dealing with that was certainly, those were scars, those are wounds that became scars, and I had made peace with them. And when I wrote it, I had to, in a sense, reopen the wounds and go back in and remember all the pain and the agony and the drama that followed. Because what happens when somebody is suffering like that is that the person you love, you see them, but they're not the person you knew. Something within them has changed. And that's the hardest thing to deal with. Now, I want to stress right at this point that today, medicines and are there that treat or at least manage the disease much better than in those days. So I don't want to get people to panic and lose hope in those situations, because they can be handled, they can be treated. And there's been some extraordinary films like A Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe talking about John Nash, the physicist that overcame schizophrenia. So it's not a story without hope. But what I went through certainly was something no parent should ever have to go through, because dealing with a son and dealing with that crisis is one of the most painful things you can go through.
Have you been able to eventually come to terms, because that was one of the parts, it wasn't very clear when you were reading the book, that you've spoken about the fact that it does mean you have to reopen some of that. Have you eventually been able to come to terms with the fact that this is the decision that he did finally take, and you weren't able to, with all your effort, with all your trying, you were not able to prevent him from taking his own life?
In the end, I had to accept and respect the decision that he made, because thinking was his life. He couldn't imagine a life without having a mind that sparkled, a mind that saw things the way he used to see things. He couldn't imagine a life of dependence. Those are decisions he took. And in the end, when I said my final farewell to him, I bowed down and respected his decision, because he was a thinking boy, he was a sensitive boy. And it's still, respect or not, it's still a very, very deep and painful thing to feel.
Right. As I said, a lot of your book is about your relationships, and you've been, as I said, been very candid about them. You described your relationship with Parveen Babi, which was somewhat stormy and, intense, stormy, very close. Your relationship with Pratima seemed to be the other extreme, where it was far free. It was literally an open marriage, right? And with all the complications that brought on. You want to share some of the stories about that? And was that in some ways easier to deal with?
Well, Pratima was a totally different case. She was a free-spirited force of nature, and I, as I said in the book, people don't realize that I am quite an introvert. I am quite shy in many ways. I've overcome that in terms of public speaking. I have no problem going on stage. But that introvert in me loved the extrovert in her. And she had this wonderful joie de vivre. And she was the one that set out to make sure that I was in her life. And I chronicled that very interestingly in my book, how she set about making sure that I saw her everywhere. She was everywhere in my life. And when somebody gets married, now again, I married Prathama not because, we were part of the 60s. We want to be the same what I was talking about the 60s earlier. We want to be part of a new generation, a new morality, a new freedom. But nevertheless, when she got pregnant with my daughter Pooja, I realized that we can have whatever beliefs we want, but to inflict that on a child growing up in India, the 60s would have been very harsh. And I could not do that. So I said, okay, let's get married. So we got married. Now, nobody gets into a marriage with the idea of going into an open marriage. But through a very interesting series of stories that happened between two people, it came to a point where I said, okay, enough of these cat and mouse games on your side and my side. Why don't we just have an open marriage and be done with it? Now, how a normal marriage transitions into becoming an open marriage, that's the story of Pratima and what follows from that. So all those are tales of Pratima, and we had even after separating because the open marriage ultimately didn't work. I know some remarkable people that have made that work. I wasn't one of them.
But that was also partly because somebody else did come into your life at that time.
Yes, but that came out of a breakdown of the earlier love and caring, sharing, a certain loneliness I felt. It was the breakdown of the open marriage that ultimately led to the other relationship with Praveen.
All right. I want to move back to some of the other aspects, but you mentioned your parents when we were starting off. And as I said, you really see the number of fascinating people who have been there in your life and the number of interesting people. Your parents, your father, who eventually became a philosopher in Milan after having been part of the Kashmiri resistance to the Maharaja, and your mother, who became a Buddhist philosopher and a monk. Tell us a little bit about them.
See, these were remarkable and unusual parents, very unusual parents. Parents that met in Oxford who could have come back to India and got the best jobs in the country, renounced it all to fight for the freedom of India. My father became this flaming communist, leading trade union rallies and strikes against the British. My mother became the Gandhian, handpicked by Gandhi to lead the Satyagraha in our hometown in Punjab, Dera Baba Nanak. And they lived, we literally lived in the huts. I was born in what was called the huts in Lahore, which are actually 2-3 kacha, thatched roofed huts, no electricity, no running water. It was a symbol of their solidarity with India's poor, but also they had no money. But this is a place where all these leftists would gather and they'd be watched and harassed by the police. Many of them became very famous. Gyani Zail Singh was there, Inder Gujral, who became Prime Minister, was there, Sheikh Abdullah was there, Hafiz Jalandhari, who became poet laureate of Pakistan, was there, Surjit Singh Barnala, not Barnala, Harkrishan Singh Surjit was there. So a lot of great political people passed through that, but they never went into politics after independence. First, they focused on the refugees and rebuilding Kashmir, and then each discovered religion in their own way. My father becoming a philosopher, my mother becoming not only a Buddhist nun, but the highest ranked Buddhist nun in the world. And what she did for the Tibetans is almost like be the Florence Nightingale of a whole generation of Tibetan refugees, who all call her Mamila, including the Dalai Lama, who calls her Mamila. And how that happened, and what she did to promote Buddhism in the West is also an extraordinary. 3 books have been written on my mother, one by BBC journalist Andrew Whitehead. So the work she did was extraordinary. The parents I had were extraordinary. Being a child of such parents gave me a sense of freedom, in the sense that we never had much, but we never felt deprived. I also realized that you can lead a very unconventional and different life and succeed and thrive. And even though economically they certainly suffered a lot, but they all ended up with very fulfilling lives. So that was a sort of inspiration for me, that you can lead a different life, which gave me the courage to take very different paths at different times in my life. And there are many stories in my book that talk about those choices that I had to make.
And we'll leave some of them for people to read in the book itself. But looking at your journey, so here you are, you're a superstar in Italy. You're doing films in India, partly because of some of the other factors that you mentioned, that you're doing films in India, you're successful in India, you've had a big thing, a couple of really, really big hits, Sekundari Mang. And then there's Hollywood, including coming back to India as the first, Indian villain in Octopussy, which must have been interesting. Right. I see a question also about what it was like acting with Vijay Amritraj in Octopussy. Tell us about Hollywood.
About?
Tell us about Hollywood. So there's a question about you, the fact that you were working with Vijay Amritraj in Octopussy.
Yeah, Vijay was also in the film, but I was the first actor to play a major role in a Bond film. Hollywood actually happened for a number of reasons. One is, of course, every major actor in commercial cinema wants to try Hollywood, see what happens. I had money, I had youth, I had stardom. Plus, at that time, in Italy, I was so identified with the role of Sandokan that many directors told me, we can't cast you. You're Sandokan. So I had, in a sense, to prove to them that I was not just Sandokan, I could do other things. So while doing other Italian projects to prove that, I realized I had to move further afield. And I pushed on to Hollywood. And I did some wonderful films up front. I did Thief of Baghdad, Roddy McDowell. I did Ashanti with Michael Caine and Peter Ustinov and Omar Sharif. And I got the Bond film. It was a terrific start in Hollywood through a series of unbelievable events. But the problem with Hollywood was, when you really got down to it, was that they weren't writing roles for Indians and for South Asians. So how do you audition for a role? And you have to audition for everything after being this huge star in Europe, get down to audition roles. The dilemma was, how do you get roles if they're not being written for you? So that's why I diversified and I said to my agent, make me the foreigner. I will play any foreign role. And that's what got me my role in Ashanti. That's what got me my role in The Bold and Beautiful, which is one of the most popular television series in the world, watched by over 1 billion people. And I played a Moroccan. I played the Moroccan Prince Omar. But it was a continuing problem of finding the roles, of the difficulty of finding roles that are not being written for Indians while being in India. The Bond film actually was the only place where I was actually cast for who I am, a Punjabi Sikh. And it was one of the big highs of my life to be sitting in the Shiv Niwas Palace, looking down on the Pichola Lake with the Lake Palace in it, sitting with James Bond on my left and Kabir Broccoli's family, the producer of the Bond film, on my right, and thinking, I am shooting a Bond film in India at the Lake Palace. I mean, that is a magical moment for me. Absolutely magical moment.
So Los Angeles, Rome, where you've been a superstar, you're now living in Mumbai. What is home, and what place would you consider home, or are all of them homes for you by now?
No, home for me has always been India. Even when I left India, I knew that I would come back to India. I guess because of my parents' passion and involvement with India, my own sense of being and belonging, I've always felt India was home. I never thought of any other place ever as home. I love London as a city. I love Rome as a city. Los Angeles has incredible talent too, but it was never home. Bombay is where I live. I grew up in Delhi, so at heart, I'm really a Delhi boy. I'm the Delhi boy that became an international star. That's one of the blurbs in my book. How does this middle-class Delhi boy become an international star? So that's sort of one of the themes running through the book. But Hollywood also was, towards the end, became very difficult for me because I really blotted my copybook by making some terrible investments. You know, when you grow up in a family where there's not a whole lot of money, and suddenly you get a whole lot of money. You think it lasts forever. And then you see that there are homes around you that the kind you want to live in, but they're more than the money you have. So you think, I've got money, I'll multiply my money. And I made investments that just lost me that money. I lost 1/3 of my money betting that Apple would succeed. Apple went down from 170 to 50 cents. I lost a huge chunk of my money there. I was right in the long term. Today, it is the most valuable company in history, $2 trillion. But in the stock market, it's the short term that kills you dead. And even my son, who was a techie, said, Apple will win in the end. He was right, but in the long term. So there was a company called Netscape, which is like Google, promising everything Google was promising. Unfortunately, it didn't live up to that promise. Lost another fortune there. Gold was supposed to go up. I invested in that. Lost another fortune there. So it
all
was
good investments, but yeah, I guess timing is what counts.
Timing was all. I mean, if you look at the price of gold from then to now, of course I was right. Many times over, 100 times over. But that's what does you in. And when you sort of have a thinking mind, you think you're smarter than the market, and you think you know better. And you researched it all, you researched it down to the marrow. Well, it doesn't work that way. The market is a beast of its own. And I suffered greatly. I had to rebuild my career from the ruin of my life. I had to resurrect it. And that's literally the last part of my book.
After all those highs and lows, life is looking, now at an even keel for you, Kabir. And otherwise, I'm sorry, we are running out of time, but we could probably keep this discussion going for another 1 hour. We can keep that to the sequel, I guess. But I'm going to get you to talk about that one story which was not there in your book when we sort of were representing St. Stephen's, and we'll try not rubbing it again, which actually won that. But the ultimate shootout to see which was the college which was the best in debating.
Right.
End on that high.
Yes. And it was a terrific shootout because the Hindu college had Hardeep Puri and Subramanian Swami and all these great debaters, and we had you, and we had Manishankar Iyer, and there was me, and there was Deepak. There was Salman Haider, and it was terrific to win that debate because let me tell you about debating. I actually fancied debating more than I fancied acting in college. But it was impossible to get into the A team. The A team had these giants who my seniors, Montek Singh, Arun Maira, Ram Chopra, Prabhat Patnaik, who can crack that team? So I was in the B team that was sent to all these smaller colleges. And that's how I got my satisfaction there. And 1 or 2 big debates. But then being part of your team and debating,
the captain.
being part of the Stephanian team that debated the Hindu team and won was also one of the big highs of my life.
Yeah, that was a great experience. Kabir Bedi, thank you so much. Time is up, but it's been a real pleasure listening to you. And thank you for the book, and thank you for being candid. And thank you, I think, also for allowing people to talk about many of the issues that otherwise people are reluctant to do. So as an introvert, you've done a fantastic job being an extrovert about your feelings in your book. So that's
right. See, the thing is, Vikram, we can talk about these things and I can give you sort of overall topography of my life, which most people have got a sense of by now. But this is like looking at the waves on the ocean. My book is an emotionally immersive experience. And therefore, to really feel what I felt and to go through the dilemmas that I went through and the human experience of triumph and heartbreak, you have to read it. You can't just know the surface of it and think you know my life. You do to a great extent now, more than you did before you came here. But to get that experience of what I went through, I think is a great human story, which is why I wrote it. But the only way to do it is by reading it. And I hope you do so.
Thank you so much, Kabir Bedi. Let me toss across to Srinivas Temple once again.
Thank you very much. Thank you.